My name is Chris Bennett. I'm a self-employed arborist in Mendocino County, and my specialty is technical climbing and hazardous removals and large tree pruning. But I've also spent a lot of time doing fuel load reduction and large area forest maintenance over the years. So just a few basic saw maintenance things that are going to come up during any work day, and you just want to be able to mind them and maintain them. This saw, we'll go over what this saw needs. The chain is dull. It's also a little bit loose. And so we'll go over how to tension the chain and clean the inside of the mechanism and make sure that it's sharp. Every chainsaw has your bar nut here. Usually there's two. The little ones sometimes just have one. And there's your tensioning screw right there. That sets the tension on the chain. And some saws have the screw as part of the body of the saw. Some saws have it as part of the cover, but it's going to be there somewhere. You'll find it. All right, but since this is loose, it's had a work day maybe just yesterday. Let's just pop it open and see how clean it is inside. Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, this is a mess. So one thing you want to watch for is this section right here where the dust and oil can accumulate right in that spot, and that's also where the chain brake sits. So if you get too much crud built up in there, it can close in that space and maybe push the chain brake on around the clutch, and you'll end up getting friction and heat, and you can melt right through your cover if you're not keeping that part clean. And then you've got more crud build up in there. So it's not super neat, super clean or anything, but that's enough that this saw will run properly. One thing that's easy to check is the air filter. And on this saw, it's right here. I just undo that. There's your air filter. And air filter gets covered with dust, saw can't breathe, it'll stop idling. So again, this isn't bad, but if this was covered with dust, I would just go scrape it off, tap it off. When they're really bad, you could like rub a little gasoline on there and get more of the stuff off, but if they're that bad, you should probably just replace it. Put it back together. It's not tight yet, but look at this. See how the bar's got this little up and down play here? All right, you want to make sure that when you set the tension of the chain, that the bar is in this position, is in the nose up position. You don't want the chain to hang down at all on its own. This feels a little tight. Now again, I've never used this particular saw before, so partly I need to know how tight does it want to be, and this just feels like it's a little too tight. Now let's have a look at different ways that a saw can be dull. It's really just plain dull. There's different things that can happen. This chain has examples of all of them. You can have the leading edge rounded off. You can also have it bent down. And so when you're filing this is something that can happen a lot, where you're filing your tooth here, and you get the leading edge nice and sharp, and you feel it, and it feels sharp, and you put it back on the wood, and it's still not cutting very well, and it's because the plane of the tooth is bent over. This happens when you're going through something really hard, or just pushing the saw too hard over and over again, and it just gets bent over. So when you're sharpening this, you have to take the metal back far enough that you're working with a flat plane again. Then your sharp edge will actually cut. Other things that can make the saw dull are previous improper sharpening, sharpening at the wrong angle, and also not preserving the cylinder well enough. And if you don't do that, what happens is if you over focus on the cutting edge here, your cylinder down here will become flat. You'll lose that curve, and that also makes the saw dull. When you hit something like a rock in the dirt, the saw can be really bad, and you might not be able to solve it well with a hand file. You might need to take it to a shop with a grinder, or just replace it. Okay, so to actually sharpen a chain by hand, it has to be on the saw and tight enough to stay in place while you're trying to file it. And this chain is a little bit dull in all the ways that I described earlier. The leading edge is a little bit rounded. It's also a little bit folded down, and the cylinder is getting a little flat from previous sharpening, not being done so carefully. So because of that, because I'm losing my curve here, I want to start with gouging that out a little bit first. So I'm going to come in basically perpendicular to the bar, and just, in this case, I need to carve down and in a little bit. That little twisting motion helps the file action be more effective. And I'm just going to go till I can see that I'm getting my curve back. Okay, that's a better curve. Now in the process of doing that, of course, I've made my leading edge even worse, but that's okay, because now I'm going to come in and fix that up. And to do that, I'm going to change the angle. If the tooth has an angle mark on it, I'll just parallel that. This one does not, so I'm going to do it by sight. And I'm going to come in at that angle that I want, and angled slightly up, going this way, not horizontal. But if you look at the tooth, you'll see that it's got a bit of an angle, so just match that angle. And then again, coming in with a little bit of a twist. And just remember that I'm carving out not just the leading edge, but the whole cylinder. And I want to do it taking off only as much metal as necessary, because the chain will last longer that way. But I do have to take off enough to get it back to the sharpness and angle that I want. that's pretty good. I've got a nice curve here. I've come back far enough so that this edge is no longer bent over, and I've got a nice sharp point right here, and I can feel the whole thing. It just kind of grabs my skin a little bit. It's not going to cut me, but it will cut wood very nicely. Okay, so this one's pretty good now, and we just move on to the next one. Of course, the next one is not this one because that's on the other side of the chain. You skip one and go to the next one that's facing that way so that you can sharpen that in the same way. And so then to do the whole chain, what you're going to want to do is file them all on one side. And then once you get all the way around, you flip the saw around and you file the others going the other way. And you'll find that here I'm twisting my wrist one way. And when you file on the other side, you have to twist your wrist the other way. So it's a whole little bit of a different exercise. And because of that, be mindful to sharpen consistently from one side to the other. It's a common mistake to make it sharper in one angle on your strong side of your arm and then make it a different angle on the weaker side of your arm. And if you do that, where it's consistently uneven from one side to the other, then your saw will not cut straight. It will travel in a curve, and you can get your bar stuck in the wood if you do too much of that. The other thing, and this is a little more advanced, but I'll point it out, is that, of course, these teeth start out long, and the more metal you take off of them, the shorter they get. But also, because they're at an angle, as you come back, the plane of the cut also gets lower. And somewhere around a few sharpenings where you're about halfway down the usable bit, the leading edge is going to be down at the same level as the raker, which, as you recall, is what sets the depth of the cut. And then you're in a situation where your bit's nice and sharp, but you're not cutting because the raker is keeping it out of the wood. So you also have to go through and file the rakers down a little bit, and that really helps to have a bench grinder to do that. But I want to point out that while the bits don't have angle marks on them, the rakers do have a depth mark, and you'll see that on there on a lot of chains, and that's also very helpful. This is kind of the maximum depth that you want to take your raker down to. Not all at once. You kind of get two filings out of it. I file the tooth back some way down to the raker, and when I need to take it down, maybe I'll take half of that off first. If I don't have a bench grinder, I can do it with a flat file. Just come across the top, take it down. It's a lot easier with a grinder. And take it down to maybe half of the usable depth, and that'll be good for a while until the continued use and sharpening of the saw takes the tooth back kind of towards the end of its life, somewhere around here. and then you'll need to do that second filing of the rakers. Take it all the way down to that mark, and then you need to start thinking about replacing the chain soon. Okay, you really have to flip the saw around after you've finished sharpening one side, because the file cuts on the push, not on the pull. All right, so when I'm pushing in, and then I'm just coming back and doing it again. So I can't sharpen the other side from this position. It's not going to work. So I just pick up the saw, flip it around, and just go back to sharpening the other side. Get my curve back, and then work on my edge. When you see, now I have to twist my wrist the opposite direction. And that's where I have to pay attention to make the angles on this side the same as the angles on the side that I just finished. So one other thing that can happen out in the field on a project day, especially if you're working in a lot of brush piles, the chain might get thrown off the bar, and we've already covered how to put the chain back on, but I wanted to mention that when you do that, what can happen is the fallen chain sits inside where the drive sprocket is, and you'll hear it grinding the metal a little bit. So when you take the chain out to put it back on, inspect the drive links, especially where they were inside by the drive sprocket, to see if they've been chewed up a little bit by sitting there. And if that happens, you'll end up with burrs sticking out here. And remember to look at both sides. You can just go along with your fingers and feel where it's been chewed up a little bit. And if that's happened, you have to file those down, because they won't. If they're really bad, you can't even get the chain back into the groove of the saw bar. But even if they're there and you don't want to really just force them down in there and keep going, because it'll wreck your bar and make the chain likely to work itself loose and get thrown off again. So if you find little metal burrs on your drive links, just get the flat file out again. And this one doesn't have any on it, but here's what you just take it down until it's smooth again, and you can feel it. You can test it on the bar. Just slip it in there and see, does it slide in and out freely. Has to be done if you want to keep going that day. From one make to another, saws can be set up a little differently, but there's going to be on the switch, there's going to be an off position, a run position, and a start position. The start sets the choke so that for a cold start. When it's a cold start, okay, a lot of the little saws also have a fuel bubble, and you usually don't need to push the fuel bubble unless you ran out of gas and you just refilled it, and the bubble will help you reprime the fuel lines. It's good to only use this when you have to, because it's real easy to flood the saw if you flood the motor if you push that too many times. Anyway, when it's cold start, I just got to pull it a few times until it made a little pop. I don't know if you heard that, but once it makes a little pop, then I put it into the regular run position, and it should just start right up. Gas-powered saws have two compartments. One is for the fuel mix and the other is for the bar oil. Any new saws require ethanol-free gasoline, which is more expensive, but your saw will last longer. And everything is the same 50-to-1 mix with the two-cycle oil in it these days. So it's real easy. You can buy little 6-packs of two-cycle mix. One of these goes in 1 gallon of gasoline, so you don't have to think about it. Just dump it in and it's going to be mixed properly. One thing I really make a habit to do, whether it's foam plugs or earmuffs, I just use them because I really like my hearing. It's the chain brake. Chain brakes can be really sensitive. The main idea of the chain brake is if something hits, okay, especially working in brush piles, I'm cutting here, but I didn't notice that, oh, the tip of my bar is hitting something else. And here's where the chain's running this way, and it can make the bar kick back in my direction. And the idea there is if that happens, the chain brake gets activated. There's no rules. I mean, there's too many different situations to just make a simple rule about it, except, hey, watch where your saw is headed, and can I stand? I'm always asking myself, okay, can I stand in a better way? You stand here. Get away from me. Here. And a couple things can happen. You're going to have to take the saw apart to put the chain back on. But also what can happen is if it comes off when it's under a lot of power, you'll hear this kind of grinding of metal sound, and it's because the chain is off the bar, but it's hanging loose inside where the drive sprocket is still spinning. And what it does, or can do, and usually does, is it chews up the drive links. The drivers are the part that you don't see. They're the part that is down inside the groove. And I have here a chain that has been thrown, so I can show you what happens to it. I'm not sure where the zoom is here, but you can see the normal drivers are nice and smooth, but these few they're all chewed up on the edges, and so the groove, the link is all, it's got burrs, metal burrs all over it. And so if I try to just put that back onto the saw, these drivers aren't going to fit down into the groove in the bar. So what you have to do is file them off. With this saw, I mentioned this before, see, with this saw the tensioning peg is on the cover. Some saws the tensioning peg is in there. If it's in there, you have to set the bar with the peg coming through one of these holes. In this case, I don't have to do that. I have to match them up when I put the cover on. When I put the chain back on, the classic mistake to make is to put it on backwards. And then you're wondering why it's not, I just sharpened it, why is it not cutting? Well, it's running the wrong way. So you just have to remember that the teeth are facing forward on the top. And if you think about how you sharpened it, that's what they looked like when they were there. In other words, they're facing backward on the bottom, which is where it meets the wood. And that's how you want it to be. So to put the chain back on, I have to go around the drive sprocket first. Then I can slide the bar in and get the chain in the bar and then pull it tight. I'm going to tighten the bar nuts right to where, I don't know how to describe this, but to the point where if I make them any tighter, I'm going to not be able to adjust the tension anymore. Okay, that feels about right. So I still have the nose up, I'm still holding it up, and now I'm going to crank the bar nuts down all the way. It's kind of like the lug nuts on a car when you're changing a tire. You want to go back and forth. That one's feeling a little stripped out. Okay. It feels a little tight. I'm going to try it one time though.